Hi, I'm Deboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I'm going to be wrapping up some books that I've read in the past few months. I haven't done a reading wrap up in a while. I feel like I always go like a whole bunch of months between doing them. And then I end up regretting it because then like a few months later, I'm like, oh crap, I like so many books to talk about. So for today, I kind of narrowed it down just to like make it a little bit easier. The first book, which is basically the reason why I'm doing this video, because I felt bad that I haven't like done a review for it. So I really did want to talk about it. And this is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oinkan Braithwaite. So My Sister, the Serial Killer is about a pair of sisters. The narrator is Korede, who is a nurse, and her sister, Ayula, as you might guess from the title, is a serial killer. She just kind of conveniently keeps having boyfriends who show up dead, and Korede is sort of having to help deal with this, or at the very least, she's having to process what this means for her, because as you might be able to guess, this is kind of inconvenient. And it becomes even harder when Ayula ends up dating Korede's coworker slash a guy that she's really into, and Korede's like, well, fuck. I remember first hearing about this book from Rincey over at Rincey Reads, and I will say that like as a general reading strategy, reading books that Rincey recommends has really worked out for me. Like I have never been disappointed, and that is definitely true for this book. I got this from the library because it was like on the new shelf, and I was like, oh, no one's checked it out. I'm gonna just take a few minutes, see if I like it, and then maybe check it out. And like 40 minutes later, I was like fully invested in this book and was almost mad that I had to go to check it out because it was interrupting my reading time, because it's short, it's fast, and like very consuming. So Korede, the narrator, has this very, very strong voice, but also a great deal of unreliability going on, because she is contending both with like her very real present of this sister who keeps killing people, but also a very troubled past that informs the relationship that she has with her sister. This book actually reminded me a lot of Natsuo Kirino, who I think is best known for writing Out, which is this amazing thrillery book about a group of women in Japan who band together in a very, very gory business enterprise. But the book that this actually reminded me a lot of by her was called Grotesque, which is also about a pair of sisters, one of whom is like has a much easier time getting men than the other. And the books do have pretty clear differences, but there's like a parallel starkness in how they approach like these issues around family and beauty and like men and all of this stuff. I think this book is also great. Like when I read it, I remember I was kind of coming off of having like a lot of frustrating reading, and so this book was perfect because it's, again, short and fast, super consuming, darkly funny, and so it was really easy to get into because I was just so into the narrator and like what it is that she's processing about this very, very specific situation that she's in. I just found it a really great read for the beginning of summer for me, but I think it'll be even better now that it's fall and Halloween's coming up, so like perfect if you like your thrillers around Halloween. The next book that I'm going to be talking about is Hither Page by Kate Sebastian. This is a cozy mystery slash historical romance. One of the heroes is James Summers, who's a war doctor. He is now like returned to his village, and all he wants to do is just chill. He wants to live in peace, but of course he can't because Leo Page is a spy who's going to come in and fuck it all up. Which, to be fair, is not really Page's fault, because apparently, in the world of cozy murder mysteries, if you live in a British village, you are destined to become embroiled in some kind of murder mystery at some point. So truly, Summer should have known better. So I remember Kat Sebastian, like when she was talking about this book, or as she's talked about this book when it was coming out, she pitched it as sort of Agatha Christie, but make it gay, which I think is very apt. This book revolves around a village and finding out everybody's secrets, because of course, everyone's got one. But there's also this sweet romance going along the side of it between these two characters who, like, they are dealing with the effects of war, and they're now just trying to find their place in the world. I will say the mystery itself was not as interesting to me. I think the pacing of it was kind of weird, the way that reveals would happen or not happen, or like happen very vaguely. That stuff kind of for me didn't work as much. But I still liked it overall because the romance was very sweet. My only real complaint, and this is maybe more specific to me, is it seemed weird to me. This book came out in June. I feel like this book should have come out in winter. Like you can see based on the cover and everything, it feels like a winter book. And that's not a thing I say often. Like usually I'm kind of like, like, you know, like a book can come out in any season. But this felt like a book that should have come out in winter. But again, I'm not really going to complain too much because I enjoyed the book, and it really got me to kind of revisit the Kat Sebastian catalog, I guess, and which will take me now to the next bunch of books I'm going to talk about, which is the Turner series by Cat Sebastian. This is a historical romance series, and I had previously read the third book in the series, which is called The Ruin of a Rake. So The Ruin of a Rake is about Lord Courtney, who is this roguish lord of disrepute that like a lot of people think of just kind of like as a playboy, and his reputation has gotten even worse because this fictional book came out with one of the characters like that a lot of people think is based on him. Like it's this kind of, you know, Casanova-ish. For the most part, he doesn't care, except that his brother-in-law is now worried about the influence that Lord Courtney is having on the brother-in-law's son. So he's like, maybe I should fix my reputation. So to do that, he calls on his friend's brother, Julian Mudlock, who is very, very, very uptight. And he asks him like, hey, help me build up my standing in society again. Medlock agrees, but of course, lust and feelings start happening between the two. I like this book when I read it. I think I read it last year, but it was more kind of like a 3.5 star read for me. It kind of just felt like, you know, feelings came on very strong and fast in a way that I wasn't super into. And so I didn't read the preceding books because I just kind of figured, you know, maybe Cat Sebastian isn't for me. But then I read Hither Page this year and I really enjoyed it. So I was like, cool, let me give the other two books that came before this a chance and see if maybe I actually enjoy them. So the first book in the series is The Soldier's Scoundrel. It follows Jack Turner, the scoundrel, and Oliver Rivington, the soldier. And they are very much on opposite sides of like the class divide. They have very different perspectives on the law, but they end up working together sort of, and you know how these things go in romance novels. The second book is The Lawrence Brown Affair, which follows Lawrence Brown, an earl who a lot of people think is mad because he has an aversion to like noises and crowds and people. And then Georgie Turner, who is a con man who has been hired to basically figure out like, hey, is this earl guy mad or not? And so, of course, Georgie Turner goes and works for him, lies to him, but then feels bad because he's also falling for him. A lot of times in romance series, you can kind of pick and choose what you want to read, and you don't necessarily have to read them all together. But there are some authors who, like, even if you can read each book individually, they'll plant seeds in other books that really pay off if you read them in sequential order. And for me, reading these books in sequential order this summer made me realize that this is one of those series. There's a lot of stuff, especially between the second and third books, that are related to each other, but there are just a lot of details in the third book that I had no clue about because I didn't read the first two. And I enjoyed it so much more after having read the first two books because you get to see how things have built out between like a whole bunch of the characters. For example, in the third book, we have this brother-in-law who's like withholding Lord Courtney from like visiting his nephew. And so for me, when I read the third book the first time, I hadn't read the second book. I didn't realize that withholding brother-in-law is actually Lawrence Brown from the second book. Like, I did not understand that these things were related. So I was reading the third book from the perspective of Lord Courtney, and to me, the brother-in-law is just like, you know, this asshole who's not letting this guy see his nephew based on a reputation that I, as the reader, know is not entirely deserved. So reading the books in the order really changed my perspective on that conflict because I understood more about the dynamics between Lawrence Brown and Lord Courtney. Like, there was just a lot more that I got that, like, yeah, again, did not get the first time. One of the things I also didn't like about the third book was just like kind of like how quickly things came together. And so starting from the beginning actually greatly changed my understanding of that pacing. So yeah. Sometimes it's good to read all the books. And so overall, I think all of this gave me a greater appreciation for Cat Sebastian. I really like the way that she weaves together romance, history, and angst. And I love how her characters all relate to each other, not just like the romantic relationships, but the familial ones, the like platonic ones. I really like seeing how those pieces came together. Another thing that I appreciated in this series is that in each book, there's at least one character who's either dealing with some kind of like chronic ailment or injury, or in the case of the second book, Lawrence Brown, you know, he's this figure that a lot of people think is mad. And I think the books do a good job of like bringing these various aspects of these characters to life and treating it in a really like real way and kind of understanding how it's rooted in their history and their current present. There's actually a new novella out in this series that I haven't read yet, so I'm looking forward to that. And she has a whole bunch of other books that I haven't read either, so also excited for that. Next up is Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino. I was so nervous about this book. Gia Tolentino is pretty well known, I think, nowadays as an essayist. She writes for The New Yorker. She also used to write for Jezebel. So she writes a lot about like culture, Yeah, culture. And so I've always really enjoyed her essays. I think she's really thoughtful. I think she's really like good at connecting a lot of different ideas from like different aspects of culture, not just like highbrow things that you think of as like New Yorker shit, but like across different levels. At the same time, I also get nervous sometimes when I get invested in particularly in like, like public intellectuals that like inevitably I'm probably going to be disappointed. I don't know if that's fair or not. That's just like my own anxiety about getting invested in someone. So I was nervous about Trick Mirror, but I ended up listening to it on audiobook, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. Listening to it on audiobook, for one, was great because she has a really nice speaking voice, and I really love reading like nonfiction writers, especially people who are talking about their own kind of like personal experiences in nonfiction. Like, I really love hearing them get to narrate their own work if they're good at it, because I really like the element of like their own personal connection to what they're writing. Like, I love how they can bring that out with their own voice, especially someone like Gia Tolentino, who has a strong voice in her writing. Hearing her actually say the words out loud somehow makes the words kind of click together even better, just because there's like a certain flow to them that's so clearly connected to just her way of speaking. Going into the book, all my nerves about it aside, the essay that I had a feeling I was going to really enjoy was Reality TV Me, which is an essay about Tolentino's experience on a reality TV show when she was in high school, which is like super up my alley. I love it when people who have been on reality TV shows write about their experiences on those shows, because it is always super interesting. I am very into that shit. If you have recommendations, even if you think I might have read them before, you just tell me, give me your recommendations, because I will lap that shit up. But the thing that ended up surprising me a lot is that the essays that I really enjoyed ended up being the ones that I was like looking the least forward to. So one of them was Ecstasy, which is like this combined exploration of drugs, Houston, and religion. And like for me, a lot of times essays about drugs don't really give me much. Like, they're just not something I find super interesting. But I think the way that she connects it to her experience growing up in Houston and like growing up in a very like specific religious environment, or specifically a very religious high school, seeing the connections she made between that like surrounding culture and her experiences with drugs was interesting. Another essay that I went into with like very much like a lot of hesitation was We Come from Old Virginia. And this essay is about the Rolling Stones story about a gang rape at the University of Virginia, which it turned out had a lot of holes in the story. And so I really wasn't sure like what to expect from this essay that seemed like it was going to be maybe vaguely about false rape accusations. But Tolentino is an alum of the school, and so she brings a lot of her own experience of like the gender dynamics there into the essay, as well as kind of like her own experience as a reporter trying to untangle sort of the journalistic choices at play that shaped how this story went so wrong. And while there is this underlying notion of like falseness in the essay, it's really approached with an empathy for the underlying rage that a lot of women feel about these issues. So I ended up really, really enjoying this essay, but it is tough. It is like, as you could expect from the subject matter, it's not necessarily going to be an easy essay to read or listen to. Another thing that I really appreciated about the essay was that she brings up the racial dynamics of the school, not just in like the present moment, but historically the school that was founded by Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner, and that has had very, very brutal experiences with slavery and raping of Black women on campus or around the campus. Like, I think she did a very smart thing in including that in the essay, because it really branches it out. So it's not just like about one specific case, like it's about an overall culture. My other favorite essay is The Cult of the Difficult Woman, which I was worried was going to be just like another essay about being difficult as a woman and how like we're held to a standard of likability that dehumanizes us. And like, I'm not against discussing that, but like that I've seen that form of argument so much in general discourse. But in a way, the essay is actually about that feeling. It's about how dominant not just the idea of the difficult woman is, but the idea of the difficult woman is. So it's like a discourse about the discourse, which might be tiresome to some people, but I think it's actually really valuable in like kind of assessing how our conversations play out, so that they're never just like one-dimensional. We're sort of understanding the various aspects of them. So that was an essay that really surprised me as well. The weakest essays for me were the first and last ones, which were, the first is like about the internet, the last is about weddings. They felt like the least fresh, I guess, of the various essays, but I still enjoyed them because I liked Tolentino's writing style and I liked the personal experiences that she brought to them. The next book I want to talk about is This Is How You Lose the Time War. This is a sci-fi novella that was written by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. It is, as you might guess from the title, about a time war. The book follows two characters. One is Red. She works for the agency, which is, quote, a post-singularity technotopia. On the other side is Blue. She works for the Garden, and this is apparently a single vast consciousness embedded in all organic matter. These quotes are directly from the summary, and I am just using those words because I don't know how to restate that in my own words. So the two are on opposite sides. They've been like running into each other, and they start sending taunting letters to each other, but that turn over the course of the book into much more affectionate letters, which is a problem because there's a time war, and I guess the stakes in the time war are basically your very existence. Like if something goes wrong at some point in the time war, your entire species, your group, your whatever will cease to exist. So stakes are high, love is hard, even harder during a time war. There's kind of a learning curve to reading this book. I think when I first started it, I didn't quite understand what the words were doing, if that makes sense. Especially like it starts with a very heavy-handed purpley kind of prose. The more you read, the more you sort of get what the prose is actually doing, and so it ended up being very fascinating. But I will say that I think this is a book that very much needs a reread, and like a bajillion footnotes, because it's so full of details and references, and I'm pretty sure I only got like a fraction of a percent of any of those references. So I enjoyed the book overall, and yet I'm still pretty sure I did not get remotely as much as I would have wanted to out of it. Another book I read this summer is Margaret the First by Danielle Dutton. This book is based on the life of Margaret Cavendish, a duchess from the 17th century who also wrote like utopian sci-fi and a whole bunch of other stuff that like got her all sorts of notoriety because, of course, that's what happens if you're writing utopian sci-fi as a duchess in the 17th century. This is a novella, so also fast and short to read, and I've seen a lot of people who have loved it, so I was very intrigued going into it. And I enjoyed it, but I have to be honest, like looking back on it a few months later, I don't necessarily find it as like striking in my memory as I expected it to be. Margaret is a fascinating character, and the book made me interested in learning more about her, but just not through the lens that the book itself was specifically using. I think it's because a lot of her story is like put up against this background of her coming from a very royalist family, at a time when like the royals are being overthrown and stuff, and that makes a lot of her background. And so it's like a lot of her struggle is based on like not getting to have her own super high class life like she's used to, and the way that like it pits that struggle against like the poorer people who are acting violently, but also because, you know, they're caught up in the system that doesn't really particularly care about them. There was something kind of jarring about that. I'm not entirely sure if it's fair. I would have to kind of go back and reread it, but that's just like one of the things that I feel like has lingered in the taste of the book for me, I guess. Like that's one of the notes that's really stuck with me. But if you had like a different feeling about that, definitely let me know. Or if you know more about Margaret Cavendish in particular relating to this particular sour note for me, yeah, totally leave a comment telling me that like I'm wrong or that you have a different perspective or whatever, because I'm intrigued by the fact that it is a very loved book and that there were parts of it that I really did enjoy, but like also, yeah, this fundamental tension that I didn't feel like the book even really like acknowledged. And the last book I want to talk about today is Sadie by Courtney Summers. So this is a YA thriller about Sadie, who is a 19-year-old girl whose younger sister has been murdered. Sadie is off to basically go get revenge against the man that she believes is responsible. Her point of view is intercut with a podcast that is basically trying to track her down. I decided to read this book because Katie over at Chapter Stacks read this book and she really enjoyed it. And she in particular really enjoyed the audiobook, and I was very intrigued. So because this book alternates between like Sadie's point of view and a podcast, the audiobook is perfect as a format because they're able to bring that podcast narrative, whatever, to life. And so they really clearly put in work into the production to make it feel like an actual podcast. And to be honest, I usually don't listen to fiction audiobooks. I have a harder time getting into them, but I was really intrigued by the notion that this book like uses the audiobook format to like bring to life this podcast. And I am still in my feelings about this book because I literally just finished it like a few hours ago, which is probably part of why I'm filming this today, because I'm just like, oh, I have all of my Sadie feelings. The audiobook was so good. I'm so glad that people suggested listening to the audiobook. The main voice actors did a really good job. The production of it, the direction of it, I really thought was really well done. And I like blasted through this audiobook. I started listening to it like a few days ago and was just like, any moment that I could, I wanted to know what was happening. This is a very intense story. It deals with abuse and rape of children, but the book is not graphic, so you're not going to get very graphic depictions of everything, which is definitely a relief. But it still builds a lot of intensity because it's playing out Sadie's history with poverty, with abuse, against this like ongoing story of revenge that she like so desperately wants. There's also a really interesting interplay between the podcast element of the book and Sadie's own story. Like you get to see the podcast kind of tracking her through time and interacting with characters that she's interacted with. And I really enjoyed it against like kind of like the broader moment of true crime podcasts that have been happening right now. Usually if you listen to a true crime podcast, you are only getting it through the podcast angle. What this book lets you do is kind of like weigh out like, oh, what would it be like to be the subject of this podcast, like in your own way, and like have this podcast be interviewing people that you've been talking to and using those people to try to understand you better. So yeah, okay, that's my wrap up. I've been talking a while and now I think my mouth is dry. Thank you guys for watching, and bye.